So what's happening, students? Hey, so to help answer some of these China questions, take a look at this. You can pause these if I go a little fast, get the answers down. But for the most part, I want to talk about some answers here for the things that we've kind of gone over in class. First one, China questions, political question. Dun 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 dun. What were the two main styles of government practiced by the Qin and Han dynasties? Explain why China needed at times both forms of government. I can read sometimes. All right. So first, the Qin were legalists. The Han dynasty were Confucian. All right. For the most part, we know that coming out of the period of the Warring States, China needed a very strong government that organized and pretty much kept fear so that people took care of what society needed in general and not necessarily their own individual needs. All right. So the Qin, legalist, emphasized military and agriculture, highly centralized, burned books, buried scholars alive, weakened the upper class so that they wouldn't challenge the emperor. And the dynasty only lasted for 14 years due to how just brutal it was. But it organized and solidified China long enough so that it could move forward. And it did under the Han dynasty. The Han dynasty is considered a golden period for China, meaning that it did very well socially, technologically, economically, and politically for over 400 years. All right. Confucian schools were put up. Everything was very organized, and as the empire expanded, they needed more and more of these Confucian scholars to help run the government. The population grew by up to like 60 million people, and it allowed China to run efficiently and effectively. All right. It also organized everything socially for China as well, with filial piety and that. So we'll talk about that in a second. But for the most part, those are the two things. And I think it's important that we remember that as we discuss how China came out of the period of warring states where there's a bunch of chaos and nobody really ruling, that it was important for legalism to be there. As bad as it was, as harsh as it served a purpose in Chinese history. Now, those people living under it at the time probably would not have appreciated it, but there you go. An economic question. Explain the Silk Roads and why it gained its birth in China. All right, and so we know that the production of silk was throughout much of Eurasia, Europe and Asia, but nobody did it better than China. All right. So the Han dynasty took special care of the production of silk and fostered its trade westward toward Persia, Rome, Greece, and Southeast Asia. And then as a result, other goods started to be traded across the two continents as well. All right. We talked a lot about it. We'll see a video in class, the world history crash course there on the Silk Road. So the social question. Explain how Confucianism enforced patriarchal ways in China. And for the most part, the patriarchal example in classical period China is filial piety. This Confucian train of thought that ordered social relationships, that children obeyed their parents and women served their husbands, and bosses, workers, and the governing, all that. But for the most part, the idea that women served men was the Confucian example of patriarchy. And remember, patriarchy is that idea that men control the power within a society. All right. The opposite of that would be matriarchy, where women were the ones that were in charge. But for most of history, we will see that patriarchy kind of follows suit here. Number 4, environmental question. Explain how the love-hate relationship between China and the Indo-European nomadic people to their north. All right, so this is what we haven't really talked about, but I think it's important to note that the Chinese didn't make the silk, pack it onto horses, and then Chinese people went and took things across what they did, because it was such a harsh desert that they could never really travel across, like the Gobi Desert, go all the way in the steppe lands over to Persia. And it was difficult to get down into India because of the Himalayan mountains, that most of the people that moved goods across the Silk Roads were nomadic people, people that lived out there, people that herded their animals from one place to another, and they depended on them to move those goods. The problem was that those people also were the same ones that would invade China periodically, and and it was like, that's why they had to build the Great Wall of China. So here they are, dependent upon the Silk Road for these nomadic people going back and forth to move their goods and give them, money. But at the same time, they had to build walls, they had to fight them. So it was this kind of love-hate, but the nomadic people, they needed it as well. They got a lot of goods, a lot of metal products that they couldn't build on their own, they got from them. So there was a bunch of give and take between the two. So, alrighty, everybody, that deals with the China questions. And if we go to India real quick, we did talk about the Mauryan and the Gupta empires in India. The Mauryan Empire helped to unite most of India and provided security and stability. All right. And that Ashoka was their number one guy, and that his laws that he put on those rock pillar edicts throughout the empire showed that it was centralized. All right. He also was able to switch the religion to Buddhism, which is another sign of hey, you've got some pretty big following if you can get people to convert. The social question, how did Ashoka influence the religious landscape in India? We also talked about how Ashoka adopted Buddhism and made it its official religion and allowed it to flourish. He spent a lot of money building Buddhist temples, and without Ashoka, Buddhism might not have made it. It is definitely benefited from Ashoka. Now, obviously, the Gupta Empire is going to cancel out Buddhism, go back to Hinduism, and replant Hinduism in India, and Buddhism is going to make its way along the Silk Roads back to China. Not back to China, but to China. All right. Finally, the environmental question, how did the physical geography of India influence India's protection? And I think when you look at the Kush and Hindu mountain ranges to the north, that it protected it, it kept the invaders out. Not even Alexander the Great was able to successfully invade and conquer India. And in fact, India was responsible for his death. However, its central location in the Indian Ocean allowed it to be a crucial hub for trade. So the two main trade routes of the time were the land routes of the Silk Roads to the north over the top of the Himalayas and the sea trade routes of the Indian Ocean basin. All right, with that being said, our next one will be Greece questions. Thanks so much. I'll talk to you guys later.